You can get a similar effect with the reflection from a wall if you position your subject near a wall that is in bright sunlight and your subject is turned away from the sun. In this photo of my uncle on his 85th birthday, he was in open shade. One side of his face is brighter than the other because there's a cement wall and it's right in direct sunlight, and it's to my right. You can't see it, but it's being hit by direct sunlight. No direct sunlight is hitting my uncle. It's acting as a nice big reflector to put nice soft lighting on his face, and you can see in his eyes a reflection of that brightly lit wall. This is an overhead view of that setup. It's a foolproof way to get good portraits using the auto mode. You can see that the wall itself is in bright sunlight, but my subject is not. He's in the shade. So again, this is what that soft side light looks like. Why wouldn't I use the portrait mode in these situations? I could have used the portrait mode in all of the previous photos, but the flash usually pops up on my earlier Nikon camera in the portrait mode. And if the lighting is perfect, I don't want the flash to fire. So test your camera in open shade, in auto, and in the portrait mode to see if you get unwanted flash. Another important thing about flash and the auto mode: in dim light, the flash will always pop up in auto mode. And this is a big problem in museums, at some parties, during stage performances, or any other time you don't want flash. Bright flash in dim light produces red eye in your subjects, and that is just an unwanted result. A strong flash used in a dark room will wash out your photos, making them look like they were taken by amateurs in 1970. This is over-flashing. You don't want your pictures to look like this. If your camera is a few years old, it may over-flash in dimly lit situations. You may want to disable the flash if this happens. Find this icon on your mode wheel. It's a lightning bolt with a line through it. This mode turns off your flash. In a future assignment, we'll be taking 3 window lighted portraits. We're going to do one in auto, one in portrait mode, and one in the disable flash mode. You will compare the results and see which one looks more natural for you. You know, the newer cameras do not require much flash in well-lit rooms. This photo was taken in auto with a Nikon 5600. The camera flash did fire, but not very strongly, so the camera did not over-flash the subject. The auto mode in modern cameras is ideal for well-lit landscapes. And of course, the flash won't pop up in a situation like this. There's no reason why you'd want to use any other mode besides auto in a situation like this, because it's just well designed for these very well lit scenes. Now this is late afternoon and the flash wanted to fire in the auto mode. The photographer used disable flash and the result was a beautiful long exposure. Of course she was using a tripod because this could have been about 1/8 or 1/4 of a second. Use auto mode when the lighting is good for people, landscapes, or other subjects. Do not use auto mode when the flash is inappropriate or too bright. Let's talk about these very useful modes: the portrait mode, the night portrait mode, and the night scenery mode. The portrait mode has been improving in digital cameras over the years. You'll need to test your camera in the portrait mode to see how well it performs. On some models, the flash fires too brightly in portrait mode. Generally, the portrait mode works best when the camera lens is in the telephoto setting. That's 55 millimeters on most kit lenses. That brings the subject closer. It magnifies the subject. The portrait mode enhances people photos by softening the focus on the background. In this case, the bit of flash brightened their faces. It's really hardly detectable that there is a flash. The background was very, very busy. It was a wall. It had ivy on it. the portrait mode really helped to soften that background. I often set up a large paper background in the backyard for studio-type portraits. In this case, the flash helped to add highlights in their eyes in the shot on the lower right. You can see the paper background that's set up in the upper left photo. Shot 1 was taken on auto with no regard for posing, direction of the light, or that it was a busy background. Shot 2 was taken on the portrait mode to help blur the background. The timing was also better, so the pose and the expression improved. These are minor changes, but they made a big difference in the photo. Removing the color from the shot helped to simplify it even more. A lot of that, sick kind of yellow color is just really not pleasing, and I thought the black and white worked a little better. Now, I keep a large black cloth background at my house, always ready for family portraits. I use a tripod with my camera, and I use the portrait mode. The portrait mode blurs the background, and it gets rid of the folds in the cloth. I covered the flash with my finger because I had lights set up and I didn't want any flash in this particular shot. This is my oldest granddaughter. And I'm in the portrait mode. The back of the chair, as you can see, is out of focus, and so are the folds on that black cloth. Sometimes the background is so busy that the portrait mode isn't enough. The background is being blurred in portrait mode in this shot of these three brothers, but it's just not good enough. And then it's time to choose a better background. In this case, I moved these brothers onto the side of the house so individual shots worked so much better. I used the portrait mode, and it did blur the background. And the flash did fire ever so slightly, but it's a newer camera, and it was hardly detectable. It just adds a little bit of a highlight in their eyes, a little bit of a catchlight. In summary, the portrait mode is best for individuals of groups of 2 or 3 when all of the subjects are the same distance from the camera. The portrait mode softens the background, so a photo taken with rows of people will likely make the faces in the back rows out of focus, like this. I recommend using the aperture mode to set a smaller aperture for more depth of field, or reposing the subjects. This was a commercial job I did for a company in Southern California, and wow, I looked at my LCD and I knew this was going to be a big problem. And the room was really not very bright. I didn't have a lot of strong lights with me, and so it would have taken a much longer exposure if I'd been in aperture mode. What I did to solve the situation is I got on a ladder. So an improved shot for this group was done when I stood on a ladder looking down at the group. Their faces were almost the same distance from the lens, and their heights matched better than the lower angle. I used aperture priority mode to get a slightly smaller f-stop than the auto mode or the portrait mode would have given me. And this makes them look more energetic, more engaged. Their head size is bigger because I'm at a higher angle, and aperture priority just worked best in this situation. Now let's talk about this very useful mode, the night portrait mode. This is also called the party mode on Lumix cameras. The night portrait mode is interesting because it combines a flash with a long exposure. Now you can think of this mode as a kind of double exposure involving 2 light sources. The long exposure of the open shutter to collect the light, and the extremely short exposure of the electronic pop-up flash. So look at this long horizontal yellow line. That's how long the shutter is open. But the very small little yellow triangle shows where the flash fires in that sequence. The flash is only burning for about a 2,000th of a second, and the exposure that the camera is achieving is much, much longer than that. This situation is most common for the night portrait mode. The shutter was open long enough to collect light from the background, but it also flashed the subjects that were in the foreground. Backgrounds usually become dark with flash, so dark areas of the subject may merge into the background. This is what you can expect with the auto mode in a dark environment. You see areas where the background, there's not enough light to accrue in the auto mode to brighten up that background. So we're existing just basically on flash. The night portrait mode could have improved this shot dramatically. Now let's look at the night portrait mode for different kinds of situations. If you want to see the background, the camera shutter must remain open for at least 1/10 of a second. That's why the night portrait mode is so essential for party shots like the one above. That's a flash, and the subjects are brightly lit in the foreground, and then the shutter has stayed open long enough to get light to show the where they are, what's going on. Now the one on the right is auto mode. There's no background details. It's a wonderful pose, but I think it would have been a lot more effective if we just knew where they were. The party mode and the night portrait modes are good for taking stage rehearsals or performance shots in small venues. But please consider others when you use this mode, because the flash is likely to be bothersome. That's why I think it's good for rehearsals, but it will disturb people because the flash fires. Here's an example of the 2 exposures achieved with one press of the button in the night portrait mode. My granddaughter is just swinging really fast with that sparkler in her hand. She is just whipping it around, and so the shutter was open long enough, and I think it was probably open for about 1.5 seconds, and then the flash also fired. So it froze her in one place, and then it stayed open long enough to accrue the light for that smearing. You can see also there's a little smearing of her left arm where she has moved, but the flash didn't really record that. On some Lumix cameras, the party mode also takes a time exposure and a flash picture together. The effect is the same as the night portrait mode. Now in this photo, a flash is used in combination with the time exposure, and we'll get into this technique a little later. It creates the same effect as the night portrait mode. Notice the main flash is not coming from the camera in this instance. It's coming from a strobe, a flash, that is set in slave mode. That's to the left of the photographer. Now when I shot this, I set that strobe on the slave mode, and that means that when my camera flash fired, the electronic flash that's off to the left saw my flash go off, and it also fired. That's called the slave mode. And then the shutter was open long enough to get all of that detail from the Santa Cruz boardwalk in the background. Let's talk about the night scenery mode. This is the time exposure mode. Use a tripod in this mode when you shoot in low light. Exposures can be as long as 8 seconds in this mode. This mode also raises your ISO level, and that may result in grainy images. If you don't have a night scenery mode, you will be using the flash disable mode that's shown in the upper left. Remember, that is the lightning bolt with the line through it. But the night scenery mode may be in your scene settings if you have the scene setting on your mode wheel. It is so useful. On pocket cameras, it's in the scene settings on your LCD menu. On Sony cameras, it's called night scene. And if you're in the intelligent auto setting, the IA setting, the Sony will automatically go to the night scene mode by detecting the conditions you're shooting in. Otherwise, you can select it from the 11 scene settings that you get to by using the SCN setting on the mode wheel. If you have a Nikon, you have SCN or scene on your control wheel. Just go into that scene mode, press the menu button, and the back of your camera will show an example of a mode wheel in the upper left, and you can rotate that with your thumb wheel, or if you have a touchscreen, you can go to them. In this particular case, I have it selected on night landscape, and that is also the same as night scene. On Lumix cameras, which have an absurd number of great scene settings, I like the handheld night shot. It's number 17, but there's also a warm light glow and 5 others, and they all do the same thing. They are the time exposure mode. Let me mention this again. This is important. If your camera doesn't have night scenery mode on the mode dial or in the SCN mode, you can use disable flash for similar results, because night scenery is the time exposure mode with the flash turned off. Compare the results and see which one looks more natural to you. The night scenery mode is good for taking indoor photos without a flash, but the shutter slows down. It was 1/10 of a second for this shot. I kind of like the motion, and his eyes remained sharp, which was very interesting, and the harp remained sharp, but there was movement in the hands. So the night scenery mode worked really, really well for this indoor shot. The night scenery mode turns off your flash. So if your flash is on and you're taking night photos, like in the night portrait mode, you're going to see bugs and water droplets in the air, and they're going to appear as these like bubbles or whatever. There's always a lot of that in the air, and you don't see it when you're just standing there, but it'll show up on your photographs. So just keep that in mind, that when you really don't want any flash at all, you really got to go to the night scenery mode or the disable flash mode.